Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining in. Today I'm painting this portrait with gouache and I'll be using a reference picture for that. So in this tutorial I'm gonna show you guys the techniques and methods that I use to paint portraits, and bear with me till the end. I'm going to give you guys some tips along the way on how you can improve your gouache paintings. I think everyone's approach to painting is different, so it's totally okay if you don't agree with me and find another methods or techniques much easier. So I've divided this video into two main parts. First, how to sketch the outline and the main painting process. So to transfer the image, I'm making a grid on the reference picture, and there's a lot of free apps that you can use. Here I'm using the drawing grid maker. So here I'm going to select the reference image, and here you can change the number of rows and columns to fit the paper size, which I find very useful. And you can also make the picture black and white. So I'm going to make 5 rows and 6 columns so that it fits my paper size perfectly and save the image. Here I'm using an A5 size page, and I'm going to make the boxes on the grid 5.2 by 5 inches so that it matches the grid I made on the reference picture. First, I'm starting with the top, and just see the gap here. So the top of the head should be here, and I'm lightly sketching the outline, and the hair doesn't cross this section, so I'm sketching the right side of the hair just close to the line here, and this section of hair ends in the box 4, which is just here. So with this technique, keep in mind which part of the object is in which section. For example, the eyes are in the second row and it's on the lower part of that box, making the exact same size as I see in the reference. So using this technique, you can draw a perfect proportion and it doesn't require any drawing skills. I suppose you can use tracing to transfer your reference image, but for that you have to draw the image on another paper first, unless you have a printed image, and not everyone has a printer on hand. But this technique has its drawback too. If you press too hard while drawing the grid, the lines might show through the paint, even more so if you're painting with watercolors. As the watercolor paper damages very easily, you can see that I sketched the grid line very lightly, so I can erase it easily without damaging the paper too much. And my sketch is also very light, so if I make any mistakes, I can easily correct them without damaging the paper. Now the painting process. For this, I always start with the face. First, I am mixing titanium white with a little bit of iridium and placing the colors on the highlighted area that I see on the reference picture. And I'm using the colors with the watercolor-like consistency because this is the base layer and I'll build up more layers after the first one has dried. Then adding a little bit of burnt sienna and some blue to the same paint mixture to darken it up, and I'm outlining the chin so there's some distinction between the face and the neck. Also painting the shadow areas on the face. And to blend the colors, I'm applying a second layer with titanium white. I found out this technique is great for blending skin tones because it gives a lot smoother finish. And for this technique to work, the previous layer has to dry slightly, not completely, so the colors can blend easily together. But if you paint the second layer too soon and the first layer is still wet, it won't give you the smooth finish because you will just remove the first layer, so it takes a little practice. And here I'm using the same color to outline the face. For this, I'm using a detail brush. It's much easier to paint details with a smaller size brush, so I recommend you to do. The subject has a bright hair. To make that color, I'm mixing viridian, lemon yellow, and burnt sienna. And as you can see, to paint the hair, I'm using single brush strokes as much as I can, and going with the direction of the hair, It will give the illusion of flowing hair and will not look just a splash of paint. And also using a light consistency of paint because it's the base layer and I'm just blocking out the white of the base. I'll put the details afterwards. And also I'm constantly looking at the reference picture to see the shadows and highlights of the hair and trying to replicate that so it looks more like a 3D object than a flat surface. And you have to keep in mind that people's face has lots of different colors to them. It's not just one flat color, so to make a more realistic look I'm using a lot of different shades and placing the colors exactly where I see on the reference, then blending out two different shades. But with gouache, blending can be quite difficult because it could be easily lifted off the base, so it's important to use light brush strokes to blend the colors. And for painting the dress, I'm using a light wash of blue and blocking out the white of the page. After the first one has dried, I'm painting the folds, and for that I'm trying to replicate the lines that I see on the reference. As I've painted the first layer with the watercolor-like consistency, it's much easier to paint several layers on top without disturbing the first layer. As the gouache paint has a higher pigment concentration, the paint doesn't spread smoothly as the watercolors does, so it's best to paint the area with a single brush stroke. And here I'm putting layer after layer until I'm satisfied with the final result. Now the hair has dried completely and I'm putting the details. As the right side of the picture is more in the shadow, I'm painting the details with blue so that it looks darker, and some of the first layer would peek through and that will give the illusion of highlight. And I'm using a detail brush to paint the facial features and lamp black to paint the iris because it's the most darkest area. Next I'm painting the background and I want it to look more out of focus, so I'm using the wet and white technique. It gives a really blurry effect. Now to paint the details on the left side of the hair, I am using burnt sienna. As the light source is coming from the left, I am using blue, or you can use another cool toned color, so it would be much darker. Here I am using quick brush strokes and going with the flow of the hair so that it looks more natural. And I'm adding white to some areas that I think looks much darker than it should. Next I'm painting darker tones to give the painting more depth, and for that I'm using a thicker consistency of burnt sienna. And to figure out where the shadows would look more natural, I'm constantly looking at the reference picture. By the way, I didn't record this, but before applying the colors into the painting, I am testing out the colors to see if they are in the right shade. or which color matches the reference picture more. And by doing this, I realized the dress looks much lighter, so I'm darkening it up using the same techniques and fixing up some last details. So I hope you found this video helpful. And if you are new to this channel, consider subscribing. I post art educational content every week and I would love to have you as a part of this art community. It's growing every single day. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or like to watch any specific topic, let me know in the comment section. I'm not an expert, but I'll try to cover it in my next video. So see you next time and bye.